let's talk a little bit about the overall timeline.
Okay.
What can we expect the timeline or the process of an injury case to look like?
Okay. So I'm sure you and I field this question a lot.
Oh yeah, when is my case going to settle?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the timeline is a lot more difficult to pin down, but we can talk about the phases here so that someone at least knows kind of how the case will progress. And I'll talk a little bit about the timelines involved, but they do wildly vary, and we have to make sure that the client understands there are third parties involved here. It's not just us and the client. We have insurance companies, we have medical record providers, things like that. But to start off here, I would say it's first critical to note that there are two different levels of an accident claim. First is pre-litigation, where we're dealing with an insurance company, trying to resolve that in an amicable settlement that everybody's happy with and is what the client deserves. The second level would be litigation. So if negotiations fail or there's any kind of contested liability or they're contesting medical expenses, things like that, that's not going to give a fair settlement to our client, then we move into a litigation phase. So I'm going to primarily talk about the pre-litigation. Okay. Vast majority of our clients, their cases are going to be in that phase. Most all of our clients is going to be in that phase to begin with, at least. So we'll focus on that. There's several different phases within that level of a pre-litigation case. First would be intake and investigation. We've kind of touched on that already, but basically in that first phase, your attorney is going to be intaking your case, gathering information from you, gathering evidence from any other agencies that may be involved, such as law enforcement, building evidence and getting a case built around the facts of what caused the accident, the liability, things like that. That's going to be the first phase. The second phase is going to be medical treatment and records compiling. Okay, so as the client is treating, we're going to be following that treatment, discussing that treatment so we know how this person is progressing. But then we're also going to be ordering those medical records. Now, those medical records are not held generally by the actual provider. They're held by clearinghouses that handle all these records due to HIPAA and other privacy laws.
And that place might be in Tennessee or Texas. For some reason, they're always in Tennessee.
Yeah, they could be anywhere in the country, and they, are housing and compiling, millions of people's records. Mm-hmm. And so we have to send requests off to those that are compliant with HIPAA and other privacy laws, and those requests have to be then fulfilled and sent back. So as far as a timeline, this is where a lot of time drain can happen in a case, because generally we may see a record come back in 2 weeks to 2 months. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we're following up on requests, we find out that they've mysteriously lost our request and we have to resubmit that request.
Or we know there's 10 dates of service, but they only send us 6.
Exactly.
So we have to send a second request.
Those.
Yeah.
So as those medical records are coming in, your attorney's also going to be reviewing those and making sure that there are no holes in the treatment or anything or in the record or anything like that. So that's kind of that second phase is going to be as you're treating. That's another thing too, is this is wholly dependent on how much treatment a client has to get. So, some clients may go to an emergency room and they're able to recover with home treatment and, home remedies and over-the-counter medications. Some may have to have physical therapy or, all the way up to, like we talked about, a specialist in surgery and recovering from that surgery, things like that. So the timeline of a case is wholly dependent on the amount of treatment, but it also depends on getting those medical records.
Yeah.
So the next phase is going to be demand and negotiation. So once all the medical records are compiled and we have all the evidence as to the liability and the facts of the accident and everything like that, we're going to compile all those records. We're going to compile all the evidence we have. We're going to send that off as a whole package to the at-fault liability insurer, along with a monetary demand to resolve the case. And so that kicks off the third phase here of negotiations. As far as a timeline for a client to know, generally speaking, I'd say we probably get our initial offer from an insurer anywhere between a few weeks to a month or 6 weeks or so after they receive it. Now, that may depend on how involved the case is, how much records there are, how many records there are for them to review, as well as the caseload of that adjuster.
Right, which, as we've seen over the last year,
yes,
that expectation has somewhat shifted dramatically because
certainly,
yeah, well, especially summer of 2020, what happened was a lot of insurance companies furloughed several adjusters. Mm-hmm. So a case might have been transferred 2 or 3 times to new adjusters who had to reevaluate the case.
Exactly.
And then that adjuster all of a sudden got burdened with a huge number of new cases because once lockdown started to lift and people got on the roads again and more losses occurred, you had more losses going to fewer adjusters because they had furloughed so many. And so you had adjusters that were overworked. And it was an interesting time to say the least.
I can give an example for you. I'll give you an example. This past summer, this was an adjuster with a major auto insurance company, and they were all working from home. Now, a lot of adjusters throughout the years have worked from home, but at this point during COVID, they were all working from home. And for her, this was an adjuster, she was a female, but for her region, which happened to be basically Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, they had one employee that would go in every day to their home office, I think in Virginia, to handle all mail, all faxes, anything paper that came in for all of these adjusters for 6 states. And so that can explain here how when we're mailing in medical records, there may be one person in an office who is receiving that, scanning that in to have it, disseminated to the actual
Those might sit there for a week before that actually occurs.
Exactly. So that could be a huge time drain. And that's why it's so difficult to nail down the timeline. But hopefully now that people know, or a potential client knows the phases here, then hopefully they can understand, the case wholly dependent on their treatment. But short of that, there are some large chunks of time here that they need to understand have to occur.